Ms. Diahann Gordon Harrison, National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons for Jamaica and Chair of the Leadership Committee of the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. Ms. Renee Batiste, CMG, Speaker of the OECS Parliamentary Assembly and Vice Chair of the Leadership Committee of the Caribbean Coalition. Members of the Leadership Committee of the Caribbean Coalition, stakeholders in the regional anti-trafficking movement, webinar panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, evening to all of you. I'm Adrian Alexander, Caribbean Regional Coordinator for Free the Slaves, which serves as Secretariat to the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. It is my pleasure to welcome you to day one of this webinar series titled Addressing Trafficking in Persons in the Caribbean, Progress Towards 2030. This series is a follow-up to last year's Caribbean Anti-Trafficking Conference and serves as the Coalition's main activity to observe World Day Against Trafficking in Persons this year. Over these 5 days, you'll hear from stakeholders from the region and across the world. We shall discuss emerging trafficking trends, meaningful youth and survivor engagement, the demand for commercial sex and forced labor, the value of anti-trafficking coalitions and networks, and the importance of self-care to prevent burnout. Today's webinar is titled Cyber Scamming and Sport Trafficking. What are they and how can we combat them? Moderating this panel is Ms. Joycelyn Hughes, a border security specialist at CARICOM IMPACS, where she leads regional initiatives on migration governance, border security, and the prevention of transnational organized crime. Joycelyn has led and contributed towards many regional initiatives, including the development of migrant smuggling legislation and the 2023 CARICOM guidance document for trafficking in persons. On the panel are Ms. Lissette Reyes, Ms. Candy Saunders-Alfred, Ms. Lerina Bright, and Ms. Diahann Gordon Harrison. Lissette is a project officer for the ONRTIP initiative at the UNODC, where she coordinates efforts to strengthen criminal justice response to trafficking in persons across the Caribbean. She works closely with UNODC's Human Trafficking and Migrant Smuggling section to implement regional anti-trafficking initiatives. Candy is a cyber analyst at CARICOM IMPACS Cyber Fusion. She has more than 18 years' experience as a law enforcement officer and in the field of information technology. She remains actively engaged in staying abreast of emerging cyber threats, digital investigation techniques, and evolving technologies, contributing to regional efforts to strengthen cyber resilience, combat cyber-enabled crime, and enhance cross-border collaboration. Lerina is the founder and executive director of Mission 89, the world's only research, education, and advocacy organization dedicated exclusively to combating human trafficking in, through, and around sport. She's no stranger to the Caribbean, having served as head of international affairs and president's office at CONCACAF, where she strengthened the Confederation's position within global football. Diahann is an attorney at law by profession and former deputy director of public prosecutions in Jamaica. She has been the Children's Advocate of Jamaica since January 2012 and Jamaica's National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons since March 2015, making her the first to hold such a position in the Latin American and Caribbean region. In the limited time for the webinar, it's impossible to really do justice to the amazing careers of our speakers. If you did not receive the webinar series brochure, please visit the Coalition's website at ccatip.org to download it. The brochure has photos of all the presenters, and you can view anyone's bio by clicking on their photograph. At this time, I will yield to the moderator, Ms. Joycelyn Hughes. Joycelyn?
Thank you, Adrian, and good afternoon to everyone. It is truly a pleasure to be here with you today alongside such an esteemed panel. I see, Adrian, that you have blessed me with an all-female panel, and whether that was by design or a stroke of good fortune, I must say, you have chosen exceptionally well. Today, the women are not only at the table, we are leading the conversation, and that is sending a message. So this year's World Against Trafficking in Persons theme, as Adrian mentioned, Trapped Behind the Scam, shines a spotlight on the disturbing reality. Victims are being deceived, recruited, and coerced into carrying out cyber-enabled fraud also. But trafficking does not stop at the computer screen where we are. It is also finding its way onto the playing field, and we hear more about that, into the training academies and behind false promises of contracts, trials, and scholarships. These may appear to be two very different worlds, cyberspace and sports, but they share one troubling thread. Traffickers know how to turn ambition, opportunity, and trust into tools of exploitation. And that is exactly why we are here today, and today's conversation begin with our four dynamic experts with us, Lissette, Candy, Lerina, and Diahann, each bringing a distinct perspective, and I'm sure a few insights that may challenge how we understand trafficking today. So over the next hour, we will unpack these emerging threats, examine where the gap remains, and most importantly, discuss what we can do about them. So let us get straight into it. I will first invite each panelist to offer brief opening remarks of no more than 3 minutes. And then we will move into the lively moderated discussion before opening the floor to you, the attendees, because I am certain that you will have questions of your own to ask. So to start, we'll start with you, Lissette, and we'll use the flow as outlined by Adrian just now. So Lissette, you will set the global and regional context for trafficking, for forced criminality, and cyber scam economies. So let's hear from you, Lissette. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Joyce. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you again to the colleagues from Free the Slaves and to the esteemed speakers I share this time with. Like Joyce, I'd like to echo the excitement of having really wonderful women leaders, sort of lead and steer this conversation, not only in the webinar, but always at the work that we're doing every day. My name is Lissette. Like Adrian said, I work as a project coordinator for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, specifically our Office for Central America and the Caribbean. I think you all know that UNODC works and has offices at a global level, so a little bit of what I will be discussing with you all today is precisely the impact of this scams for trafficking for forced criminality, which is this theme that we have this year of being trapped behind the scam. Talk a little bit more about the effects this has at the global level and sort of what do we need to think about in our region and start prepping, as it relates to what we're seeing in other parts of the globe. I think I'll stop here for a little bit of an introduction and pass the floor to my next colleague, perhaps Candy, for the order I see. I don't know, Joyce, if that's okay.
That's quite fine. We've heard the global picture from you, so now we'll speak to Candy on the regional. Candy?
Thank you once again, Joycelyn and colleagues for Free to Say for this opportunity to present. From a regional perspective, I could speak from CARICOM IMPACS, but giving you that cyber aspect, we now see that this is now entwined. Everything that involves human trafficking, and even for the aspect of drugs, that there's an element of cyber that is tied to all of these. And it's no longer a regional thing, but there's that international connectivity that criminals use various networks, such through social media, to entrap and to get victims to be a part of this network. We have also seen the increase of cryptocurrency transactions, to which criminals are using less and less more fiat. So cryptocurrency and the dark web is now intertwined in this, and which includes the aspect of drugs and human trafficking. So this discussion would be very, very much important from a CARICOM perspective, where we'll see the type of crimes that are taking place and the methods and methodologies that criminals are using to greater hide these activities. And for us within the law enforcement field, how can we better combat these type of crimes? Thank you, Joycelyn.
Thank you so much for that, Candy. And now this brings us to the world of sports. Lerina?
Thank you so much, Joycelyn. And thank you, Free the Slaves, for the invitation, the honor to be part of this this panel. I think just to give it some context into how I got into the space. I worked 20 years in international sport governance. As Adrian mentioned, I was head of the President's Office and International Affairs. I also worked at the Bahrain Olympic Committee and Bahrain Football and the Irish Football Association, and I've been involved in the Olympic movement and the sporting family or the football family for quite some time, and it took the happenings in 2015. And if you cast your mind back at the FIFA scandals, unfortunately, my boss then was one of those that was among those involved in that. But that allowed me to step aside for some time, and I came across this issue of football trafficking, and I think it was an article in the Telegraph. And I was absolutely shocked, just because I had been in this environment, as I said, for many, many years. And, words such as safeguarding, words such as human rights, forget, modern slavery and trafficking. Those are not words that are used in those environments, and certainly there's no framework to address these issues. And it was in digging and researching and speaking to the different stakeholders. And initially, I thought that the football agents were the perpetrators, but very quickly learned that it is a multi-stakeholder issue. There are many legitimate stakeholders, so to speak, that are facilitating or complicit, either directly or indirectly, in facilitating this crime. And so as an organization, we focused on research, education, and advocacy as a way to tackle this issue of exploitation and trafficking in sport. We published the Global Thematic Report on Sport Trafficking December 2024, even though we only recently launched it. That's another story. But that was for the very first time, the definition, a policy definition, was developed, and what that means is that we can now, collect data. It's much obviously easier to identify, what we're talking about, and so I will go into much more detail, obviously, when we when we start the panel discussion. But also just to say that a trend that we have seen, speaking about cybercrime, is that, post COVID, a lot of the recruitment of young athletes, is now happening on social media platforms. So we've definitely seen that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Lerina. And yes, we will definitely explore more during the discussion. And now, finally, Diahann.
Yes, so thanks again for the introduction. And of course, it is certainly a privilege to be participating in this webinar. And I think I come from it, certainly in terms of my opening remarks, from two perspectives. So one, as Jamaica's national rapporteur, and then also as the current sitting chair for the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. And I think both positions give a particularly interesting vantage point, and that is that there is an undeniable correlation between human trafficking generally and cyberspace. There certainly has been a proliferation of digital platforms that are widely accessible by a number of persons throughout the Caribbean region. And just by way of observation, I'll mention, just a particular situation that arose within the Jamaican context when we started noticing that for a given period, I think it was in 2024, all of the matters that we dealt with had some element of digital infusion. So it may have been that the parties initially met online, or it may have been that they didn't, but then the online interface through WhatsApp chatting and direct messaging on other platforms caused that kind of connection to flourish, and then to lead to what we were now dealing with as an issue reported to the office that I have the privilege of leading. And so for me, the theme is certainly very timely. And also, this webinar, I think, gives all of the stakeholders, both those who are actively in the space and those who are passive stakeholders, and I speak about our Caribbean nationals, that we need to increase certainly the vigilance with which we operate within digital spaces, because information, sometimes unwittingly shared, is then used to feed the exploitation and to have the human trafficking element thrive. And also, just to say that the Caribbean is a sporting region. We've been marking our footprint globally for quite some time. Some nations a little bit more than others, but the point is, we too have a very present recognition that sports trafficking is something that could affect our region. And so from where I sit, as I said, very timely topics that will allow us to share different perspectives and hopefully increase the awareness throughout the region, which of course is one of the best forms of prevention, which we're all about in this region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diahann, for that. And indeed, I mean, thank you guys for such a rich opening statements. It tells us that the discussions that we're going to be having coming up in this session, it's going to where we dig more deeper into some of the issues that you actually raised. And I mean, I really can't wait to do that. So I'm just going to dive in, and some of the questions that I already wrote down here, I will throw them into the discussion that we're having. So starting round one, I would call it round one because I just want to say we want to now understand the threat that is happening. And I'll go first to you, Lissette, invite you to actually provide now the global context. I mean, like this year's theme 2026 is Trapped Behind the Scam, which reflecting the growing recognition of trafficking for forced criminality. So from UNODC's perspective, global perspective, how have online scams operations evolved into trafficking enterprises? And why has this phenomenon now become relevant to our Caribbean? And I know that Diahann spoke a bit about it, and also Lerina. Over to you, Lissette.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And when I had this discussion with Adrian about this webinar, I got particularly interested, not only because this is the topic of the World Day Against Trafficking, but precisely, I think, is one of those things that we need to work hard to increase awareness, about. One of the main things that, as I was even reading to prepare for this webinars, I found a particular number that I wanted to share with everyone. And within UNODC research, we estimate that there is an 18 to 37 billion financial losses from scams targeting victims. And this is specific to East and Southeast Asia. But as I was researching for this session, I even saw some losses based on cases in Jamaica, Diahann, that you guys have had some big cases of online scamming. I think that from your question specifically, how have online scam operations evolved into trafficking? I wrote some notes here, and one of the main things I wanted to leave as a message here is that the first point we need to make is that human trafficking is the core element of these, one of the core elements of backbones of these online scams. Today, many of these operations are happening under the scheme of trafficking in persons, and it's moving very fast, and it's posing a challenge for those of us who work in the field because it's really hard to identify. As you note, and I think one of the esteemed panelists mentioned, the online recruitment of people has increased significantly since COVID-19. And one of the biggest things that we have been seeing precisely is, taking advantage of that financial need of people, luring them through fake job ads, and then, forcing them to that online scam and criminalities. The main thing I want to share, even with the reading and the work that we're doing, is sort of put out there that these are not most of the time perpetrators by choice. Like I said, is usually under the scheme of a pretty highly organized structure of organized crime. One of the things too that I think it's helpful for this discussion is when we think of human trafficking, we always, especially in our region, we always think about, sexual exploitation and labor exploitation. I think it's more timely than ever that we start opening our eyes and minds and to be mindful to what we see and what we read into the environment because it's switching and technology is being a big enabler of that in the region. The other part of your question was, why is this relevant to the Caribbean? And some of the biggest work that we've done on this topic has happened in Southeast Asia, where they have this compounds where they sort of force people. And while we haven't yet identified any in the region, this is to say that it doesn't mean that there aren't. It's just that there haven't been identified yet. And I mean the region Caribbean, even Central America. Instead of having compounds, what we've seen in other countries is, smaller operations like call centers, where through the call centers, they, sort of force people to conduct those scams. And then the other thing that I think one of you mentioned it before too is businesses disguised as, legitimate online businesses, but used as a platform to scam people. I think I'll stop here with your question. But before we go into the next one, Joyce, I wrote here, which I usually do when we talk about trafficking, is that what we don't name does not exist. And I think it's time that we start talking about this whole topic of forced criminality, understanding that human trafficking is central to the scam economy. And until we start, working together and training and sort of preparing ourselves, is going to be a pretty difficult task, as we go forward, understanding how quickly this market is growing.
Thank you so much for that, Lissette. And I'm going to ask another question because I noticed that you spoke about that the laws across the Caribbean were primarily to address sexual exploitation and forced labor. So I just wanted to add another question here is that what legislative or prosecutorial gaps exist when responding to victims coerced in cyber-enabled criminality? And how should the principle of non-punishment be applied?
Thank you, Joyce. We're pretty aligned. One of the main things I've seen, and we have a new project based on this in Central America, is just getting started. And one of the main things that we have identified first is, institutionally, there's a gap because many of these cases are often investigated under fraud or cybercrime, and then the tip units are not necessarily, linked. Or you may have a tip unit that is linked but does not have the expertise to investigate the cyber scamming or the fraud part of it. And you can have two entities of the government, working in silos without being able to identify with each other that you have the convergence of two crimes altogether. One of the main things that, which is why I'm like they say a little geek with the Palermo Protocol is precisely that, sure, it provides the standard definition of what trafficking in persons is, but it allows countries precisely because of context and the evolving modality of the crime to have different modalities based on the realities of each country. And one of the things that we are sort of encouraging to do is the adoption of this forced criminality as a modality of trafficking. We recently held the working groups on trafficking in persons in Vienna, and that was one of the biggest discussions that were had among all of the member states that participated was how could you get started in recognizing or tackling the crime? And one of those ways is precisely recognizing it as a modality. But that always come accompanied with other things like you need to have the institutional base of, your police and investigative units coordinating with each other, not working in silos, sort of adding instructions as to how to jointly investigate these things. The exchange of evidence when it comes to online investigations can be pretty challenging as well. So one of the main recommendations is one, the consideration of it as a modality of trafficking in national legislation, but two, providing assistance and support, to investigative units, police, into coordinate, like joint and coordinated investigation, and then written instructions. And then last but not least, you asked about the direct implications of the principle of non-punishment. And honestly, it should apply in the same exact way as it does in any other recognized trafficking case, that if a person has been trafficked and compelled to commit an unlawful act as a direct consequence of their exploitation, they shouldn't be punished for those acts precisely the same way. That protection obviously can only be applied if the situation is recognized as trafficking, of course, and you can showcase that this person has been coerced into doing these crimes or committing these crimes. I'll stop here.
Thank you so
Joyce.
much for that, Lissette. Thank you for giving us the global dimensions of this. And of course, within the Caribbean, we do know, and Candy, you spoke about that too, cyber-enabled scams cannot only be viewed as isolated online offenses, they may be connected to organized criminal networks. So to you now, Candy, from a regional perspective, how are cyber-enabled scam intersecting with organized crime, such as money laundering, corruption, and trafficking in persons across the Caribbean? What type of emerging trends should regional practitioners be monitoring? Over to you, Candy.
Thank you, Joycelyn. So I'll start with the last question first, just to highlight some of the trends. I know this might seem or sound as simple as it is, but it's something that is trending a lot within the region. Right now in the region, we are having a lot of digital transformation changes. And one of the things that we are seeing member states are doing is allowing persons to enter their country through digital forms, immigration forms, and you go online and you want to come, let's say, to Barbados, there's a form that you fill out. And within the region, there's no country that actually charges anyone to fill out a form to enter their country. And we are seeing where criminals are using fake websites, and we know with the advancement of AI, these sites are looking really genuine, and persons are actually filling out the information, and then the criminals would charge you a fee. You would use your credit card information, pay the criminals, and then the criminals will go to the legitimate sites, fill out your information, and then give you the official QR code. So when you enter the country, it's smooth sailing. As simple as that is, that information that you gave goes to the dark web. It helps fund criminal activities. And in funding these activities, that is where we have the organized crime networks, the trafficking. So they have the funds to do it. And we spoke about cryptocurrencies. And that is another thing that is a trend that's in the region. Within the region, we are seeing a lot of cryptocurrency ATM machines. These are not regulated. So in doing so, the criminals use these machines to either, one, get victims to pay money through the machines, or two, they use it to extract funds. So those are two of the main things that we are seeing. From an online perspective, there is where, because of the advancement of AI, we are seeing a lot of investment scams where criminals now are using AI to take official heads from member states and use their voices to create videos that ask you to invest in schemes. These things help fund networks. So it's not only because, hey, I just fund and that's okay, I got back my card, I got back my money. But in doing this, you see the information that is being dumped on the dark web, and the criminals are using it. So cyber-enabled scams have evolved far beyond isolated online fraud. Across the region, we are seeing increase merging between crimes and traditional organized crime networks. Criminal groups are using digital platforms. We see where a lot of the gaming platforms now, that is where the criminals do their initial communication. And then after they move over to more private social media platforms that have conversations. So that is a huge concern for us in the region. And we are continuing to monitor. We liaise with our national points of contacts to give them real-time information as soon as it comes in. But as we evolve, so does the criminals. So it's an ongoing thing. So one of the things that we are pushing within the region is the CARICOM Cybersecurity and Cybercrime Action Plan, which would allow member states to more harmonize the legal aspect. And one, for us to be able to provide more capacity building within the region to help fight this scourge called cybercrime. Thank you, Joycelyn.
Thank you so much for that. Your response reminds us that trafficking continues to adapt to new technologies and, of course, to the criminal market.
Yes.
However, we can also say exploitation can also be concealed behind more traditional aspirations, including the dream of becoming a professional athlete. So with that, I'll go to Lerina now. Sports trafficking remains relatively unknown to many audience. So could you just explain how these schemes typically unfold from the initial approach by fraudulent recruiters to the eventual exploitation of the victims, and why football remains particularly vulnerable? Since you also mentioned football when you were speaking, doing your opening remarks. Thank you. Lerina?
Sorry. Okay, I'm on. Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, we now have a definition for sport trafficking. It's a policy definition, a working definition that has been internationally recognized. It is aligned with the Palermo Protocol. So because I know at the inception there were some concerns that we were trying to deviate, but I always find it very important to note that. And so, just broadly speaking, I would say sport trafficking is the recruitment or movement of persons for exploitation, where sport is basically being used as the vehicle. So it's a setting, it's a pretext, and yes, and it happens in widely, I would say, 3 different forms. As was established in the report, there's trafficking in sports, there's trafficking through sports, and there's trafficking that happens around sport. So trafficking in sport is the exploitation that's happening within the sporting ecosystem itself, within sport, the sporting activities itself. So it's when a young person is genuinely recruited to play. It could be for at a trial, or it could be for an academy, a club. But the exploitation is happening within that environment. So it could be sexual exploitation, it could be labor exploitation, especially when it comes to contracts. Often especially for not necessarily, we're not talking about the higher leagues. A lot of the exploitation is happening at the grassroots level, so at training centers. But in terms of clubs, it's by the time they arrive at the Premier League or the first division in, say, European football, they've already been whitewashed, so to speak, and a lot of the exploitation is happening in the lower leagues, where contracts can be abusive or exploitative, and so forth. And then trafficking through sport is when there's no real opportunity. It's the sport that's being used as a vehicle, or as I said before, as a pretext. So the child is not going to play at all. The trial or the academy is basically the instrument that the trafficker is using to get a visa issued, and to obtain the consent of the family. And once that child or youth arrives at destination, often they don't even get there. They're stuck in transit. They're then put into other forms of trafficking. Trafficking around sport, that has largely to do with mega sporting events, and it's the exploitation that is happening, I would say, at the edges or the fringes of the industry. So for example, we just had the World Cup that ended. I know there was a lot of conversations and media blitzes about construction and labor at the Qatar World Cup. And also, indeed, South Africa, Brazil as well had many issues reported. But there's also sexual exploitation that happens, around these mega sporting events. So this form is most often missed because nobody, it doesn't involve an athlete. It basically involves the people and the services around sporting events. And how it manifests is, I would say, quite consistent, because it begins often with an approach. Increasingly, as I mentioned before, it's happening online. A man, a woman, presents him or herself as an agent with an overseas connection, shows photographs of him or herself with a famous coach, with a club crest, sometimes an entire fabricated academy page. And they're getting extremely sophisticated, by the way, extremely sophisticated. 8-9 years ago, when we first started looking into this issue, immediately, I could tell, especially having come from sport, I would receive a invitation letter to a trial to verify, and I could immediately tell that it was fraudulent because, let's say, the crest was a little bit lopsided, or just very easily discernible, indicators that it was not a real opportunity. But now, as I said, it's getting more sophisticated, especially as it's these recruitments are happening online. We've seen pages, just staying on the whole online recruitment part. We've seen pages where they've used the colors of a legitimate club. The one I'm specifically thinking about is, calling it an academy in Manchester, using the colors of Man City. But actually, when you dig further, it has absolutely no affiliation at all with Man City at all, or with the club. So there's always money that exchanges hands. They always would tend to request for fees for the trial, for registration, for travel, and you have families that are selling their assets, borrowing money. So the debt is not, I would say, incidental. It becomes a form of, it becomes a control mechanism, right? And it's what makes it even more complicated, because there's that shame and all that the athlete then, or the player then, experiences when he or she finds out that it's not a legitimate opportunity. Lastly, I would just say that in terms of why football, I think it goes without saying, it's the biggest, greatest sport in the world, dare I say. Commercially, it's the most, it's the most viable, and so traffickers, use this as an opportunity to lure young people and promise them dreams, promise them opportunities that will improve their socioeconomic opportunities. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for that, Lerina. Because it is a parent dream for their child to actually play in an international sporting event. You spoke about some of the warning indicators and so forth. I'm not too sure if you could probably elaborate on some more of those. And also, I mean, you spoke about the false letter from maybe a football club, Manchester, or so forth online. So is there a place where on an agency or sporting federation where the parent can actually go to find out if this is real?
Yes and no. Because a couple of years ago, Diahann, you were with us at Westminster, but we also organized a similar session at least 5 years ago, when we invited some Premier League clubs and some of our institutional partners. And the idea was to discuss with the Premier League clubs, how they can, what they can do in terms of providing advisories on their websites, just showcasing in a public way what a legitimate pathway looks like to joining the club or becoming a footballer. There was some hesitancy there, you will not believe it. And the reason why is because many in football, many of these clubs, they work with satellite clubs, satellite academies in different parts of the world. and not all those clubs and academies are regulated, and not all those scouts that they use to identify are, due diligence may or may not have been, so these are some of the challenges that we face with them, because it's just the nature of their business, their supply chain, and hence the hesitancy, because we asked them simply if they could publish, for example, the names of the agents that they work with across the board. And that was also met with, there was one particular club that was all for it, but quite a few of the others were very, very hesitant. Even when we said that, because what we were looking at was a digital solution, just to create an app, and that was connected to their platform. So it wouldn't even be that, let's say, the scout's name would be publicly stated. It's just that, let's say that the footballer would type in a name, and at the back end, it either verifies that that is an actual coach, scout, etc. So they weren't going for that. But anyway, so in terms of indicators, legitimate clubs, academies, they don't charge families for trials or placements. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? And any request for money is a red flag. If a parent comes into a situation where this so-called scout agent is controlling everything, the contract, the travel, the accommodation, the document and finances, that also is a bit of a red flag. And certainly if their child upon arrival or not, mentions that their documents have been withheld, either by the club, by the agent themselves, or whoever, that would be a red flag. Yes, so in terms of verifying intermediaries, there is the FIFA. FIFA has a page on their website, which I have to say is not easily accessible either. You really need to know where to go to find it, where you can verify whether an agent is legitimate or not. But there's a caveat to that, because FIFA has now, which is a good move, they have, they now have an agent. You need to take a test, basically, to become a FIFA agent. However, that is costly. Secondly, I think the test happens once or twice a year. So far the pass rate, I understand, is much less than 50%. If I recall, it's about 30%. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but there are some clear indicators, certainly.
Thank you so much for that. And forgive me, Diahann, I know that Lerina has to go, so I just wanted to kind of cover most of her questions. So I just have one more for her. Actually, I think in your opening statement, you did speak to an example that illustrated how sport trafficking manifests in practice and what interventions proved or could have proved most effective. You spoke about a case. I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit more on that, or
Yes, happy to,
yes,
because
please.
the patterns are, consistent.
Okay.
And so, take, for example, I'm now thinking of a young Malian, we'll leave it at that, footballer, talented, was approached online by a man presenting himself as an agent. He then pointed, asked the agent to speak with his uncle, who was managing his career. The agent then asked for for money to travel, several $1,000s. In the past, again, by the way, you often see 3,000, 5,000, being requested. These days, we're talking about 10,000. We're talking about 15,000 in order to organize, a trial with a football club. So it did happen. He arrives on a short stay visa, that is. He is not met at the airport, which was what was arranged. And instead, he called a number, which after repeated attempts, picked up. It was indeed somebody from the club, who then asked him to go to a hotel and stay there, and that somebody will come meet him. That never happened. And eventually, obviously, the hotel management were asking for payment and so forth. So he then had to reach out to his family again to borrow some more money. And then one aspect that I missed was also the facilitation of the president of his club, because the president of his club had spoken to this so-called person at the club, who then, from what we understood later, there may or may not have been some money that exchanged hands, upon the club, learning about what had happened, because it is a legitimate club. It was a legitimate invitation. When the club learned that this man, with it, the scout, had done what he had done, they fired, he was no longer there. So this poor boy basically had to move then to Portugal, because they found him another club. And it turns out the club, he was asked to stay in a place that was 3 hours from the club. So he was walking, to the club back every single day. Obviously, he was not giving his best. And that particular club in Portugal wanted to keep him, but because the agent, his agent wanted more money, the club weren't willing to pay that amount. And so he had to move again. And he ended up in Paris. And in Paris, he, to survive, he was working at a hotel, undocumented, and he was getting paid €200 a week. Right. So that was, a form of obviously exploitation. And we have since, we've been working with a lawyer, with him. And the club that I speak about, which again is a legitimate club, obviously doesn't want to speak about this issue. The lawyers have tried to reach them, because it was a bad apple within their, within their establishment that was using the club's name and, to get money and cohorting also with the president of that club, of the player and the agent. So they were all in cahoots. But it can be complicated, and sometimes this is the reason why these cases, when they do get to court, often are ruled not necessarily as sport trafficking, but as in various other the rulings don't necessarily amount to sport trafficking. But we're hoping that now that we have a recognized definition, now that we have typologies that are also included in the global thematic report that distinguish between the various forms of trafficking and exploitation and sport trafficking, that it makes it easier for law enforcement, for judiciary officers to recognize the crime and rule accordingly.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Lerina. And I do agree that awareness for the sporting federations, education institutions, clubs, governments, this is very key for them in preventing these sort of exploitation. Thank you so much. All right, so Diahann, let's go to you now from as Jamaica's national oversight perspective. Emerging forms of trafficking, such as these forced criminality and sports-related exploitation that Lerina just spoke about, becoming more visible, or does under-identification remain the principal challenge?
All right, so under-identification certainly is a challenge, but I want to just be very, very pointed in saying that before we even knew of the terminology forced criminality, there were particular criminal acts within the Jamaican context for sure, which were very clear examples of persons being forced to participate in criminal activity. And then they in turn become in conflict with the law because they are prosecuted for whatever it is that they did in furtherance of the exploitation, which was not something that they voluntarily entered. So certainly within the Jamaican context, we from the Office of the National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons have been vociferously saying that these elements that have existed from as long as I can remember, even before the trafficking in persons legislation, are clear examples. And we speak, for example, of a schoolboy who is forced, for example, to transport items from point A to point B because he is going to be easier to get through any particular police barricade or spot checks that may be operated. So he's being forced, for example, to transport a weapon. And if that schoolboy is stopped, he's going to be searched and he's going to be charged and prosecuted for illegal possession of firearms. So that's one example. And we also have unsuspecting children as well, sometimes who are used as the lookout if there is a robbery that is being done, or as the body that makes it through the burglar bars when they need to get it to somebody's home at night. So we are seeing forced criminality all over a number of different subsets of criminal activity. And in fact, we have gone on record to make a recommendation to our parliament here to include forced criminality as a type or as a modality of trafficking in persons. There seems to be great interest in that regard, so we remain hopeful. In terms of sports trafficking, we don't have that in our legislation specifically named, but we do have at least one prosecution under the general principle of forced begging, which involved a so-called football coach who had recruited youngsters to train in a particular academy with a view of going overseas to North America to play in a football league. And so that was a prosecution because of the exploitative elements, which I think serves as a very clear signal to Jamaica that these things within the context of sport are not foreign to us. And in fact, that there is very great ground for persons to exploit potential athletes. As Lerina said, everybody wants to become the next big thing. And sometimes when you get a very attractive offer, both as the athlete and as the parent, you become very intrigued. And sometimes you are prone to making mistakes and falling prey to the would-be exploiter. So with the potential and the vulnerability, one of the things that certainly we want to stress in terms of any uptick is the need for, as you said it, Joycelyn, public education, but that awareness should also include the parents, because you never know when your child could be the star footballer a particular game, and then somebody takes an interest, or an athlete who is doing amazingly well in track. And so that education has to be very culturally appropriate and in, methods that are particularly grabbing, that will seek to secure the understanding of the general population, including athletes and parents themselves.
Thank you so much for that, Diahann. And I just want to add, what do you think would move the needle more on visibility for persons to see these sort of stuff are happening? I know you spoke about public awareness, but is it better data, better screening, more cooperation? What do you think would move the needle?
All right, so I think it's a happy mix of all of them, because with more data, it means that you are able to identify specific instances, and then you're able to measure as well over a particular period what your incidence rate looks like. Once you can measure it, it means that you can craft better solutions to address it. In terms of the cooperation now, human trafficking in all its forms, whether we're talking about cyber trafficking or sports trafficking or any other type, it is a team sport. It really involves stakeholders interweaving their energies and their abilities from their various organizations and really seeking to cauterize the problem. If we try to go at it in a silo, then we are going to have a serious problem with being effective and impactful. So that's also important. And then in terms of the public education, it can't just be that you're telling people something. As I said, it has to be informed by what culturally within each particular territory's reality is going to connect with your population. Does it have to come from a soca artist if it's in Trinidad? And is it that we beef up interactive domino sessions, for example, around carnival time within the Jamaican context? Are we going to be going to the town centers where the pan chicken man is and having a reasoning on the corner about these things? And of course, using the traditional media spaces, such as television with interactive series and also on digital platforms.
Thank you so much for that. And do you, as the national rapporteur, do you think that the mechanisms in your member states, because I think Jamaica is the only country with a national rapporteur here in CARICOM region. So do you think that that mechanism strengthens accountability, improve national reporting, and foster multi-sectoral coordination? What are your
Yes, I
thoughts?
think it is a useful model. Any rapporteur who is, reporting and measuring and putting the data forward has to be an asset to the national conversation and to the national framework. And so, as I said just now, if you have data, it means you can measure it. So if you have a rapporteur tracking what's happening within the country and saying to our stakeholders, this is where a gap is, and here's the recommendation for how we can plug it. Not just a bold recommendation, but one that is informed by data and by research and by comparative analyses in terms of what other jurisdictions may have done. It also means that we're able to identify our trends and we're able to look at our risk exposure and take mitigating steps, which will, of course, increase preventative measures and therefore make us a little bit more anti-trafficking, hopefully. And also, very importantly, is that accountability, it's not about wrapping countries or your country on the knuckles. It's also about telling them what they are doing well. And so we need to upscale these interventions because they work well. And so it certainly would be a very welcome inclusion to have additional rapporteurs across the CARICOM region, because that now would also foster interconnectivity and the cross-fertilization of ideas that can only serve to enrich our region.
Thank you, Diahann, for those. My next question is actually going to Candy now. You've heard from Diahann, you've heard from Lerina, and of course, Lerina spoke about a case that she knows of. So CARICOM IMPACS facilitates regional information sharing and operational coordination among member states. So without discussing anything sensitive or so forth, could you share how this regional collaboration has strengthened Caribbean ability to detect and respond to these emerging cyber-enabled threats? What additional partnership will be essential going forward?
Sure, Justin, thanks for that. Within the region, yes, because of the advancement of technology and of course the advancements of crime, we have seen the need for us to have more collaboration in the region to improve our collective ability to identify, assess, and respond to cyber-enabled crimes. So through information sharing mechanism, we do things like to build that collaboration, we do like joint training initiatives. We even have sessions online to us to be able to have information sharing with our member states. What we have in the region also from our cyber fusion unit, we have national points of contacts who we keep in contact with. So let's say an incident happens within a country. From that, we would actually we will gather the information, collate it, and then send it out to our national points of contacts immediately. If they need assistance in anything, we would also provide that information regionally. So some of the things are directly sent to member states. There are others that we use through various methods of circulation. We have brown bag sessions that we do monthly to let member states know of what is taking place in the region, what to look for, how to identify crimes, and who are the persons that you can report these crimes to. So that is very much essential. We also, because we have the digital transformation projects that are happening within the region, we see that there's a need for us to have a hub for information sharing. So one of the things that CARICOM IMPACS is doing, we have implemented a digital forensic management platform, which would allow us and member state, one, to report incidents, two, for us to be able to record those incidents and alert the specific country of the incidents, and three, have that pool of regional experts that we can actually use to help us if something occurs or to provide some sort of capacity building or awareness throughout the region. So we know that we are working together. We have seen the collaboration growing with member states and there's greater communication. So one of the key things we know is information sharing through national points of contacts and us being able to effectively inform member states of any incident that occurs within the region. Thank you.
And to add to that, public-private partnerships are key.
Yes.
Do you engage with technology companies also to strengthen the collective responses across member states?
Yes, definitely continue development through trusted partnerships among agencies and international and local organizations. We see that there's a need because we need that public-private relationship in order for us to bolster our cyber capabilities to be able to let the public be aware. Because one of the targets we are seeing now is the elderly, and there's a need for a lot of awareness. So through different projects and coordination that we have with private organizations, we help to push information to members of the public so let them know, because we have seen where with AI now that the criminals are using voice technology to be able to port to be from a bank or some financial institution to encourage them to send money. So yes, that public-private partnership is key within the region, and through the CCS CAP, one of the pillars actually provides a regional framework for strengthening cybersecurity, resilience, collaboration, and incident response. So that's one of the key things that we are driving through the region through the CCS CAP.
Thank you so much. And to you, Lissette, looking at the legal and policy environment, what practical reforms do you think CARICOM member states should prioritize to strengthen the identification and protection of victims affected by these emerging forms of trafficking, especially as we're speaking about the sports-related trafficking?
Thank you so much, Joyce. I think Diahann touched base a little bit of one of the main things that we're recommending. So number one, obviously, having the recognition of this as a modality in the legislation would be key, but we all know how that can be a lengthy process, in the different countries. It does not mean that it's impossible, but it does mean having to go through, a certain usual long process. In the meantime, there are other measures that we can, start being a little bit more practical about. And then Diahann touched base on not working in silos. And I think that's the key thing that we are encouraging to sort of continue promoting the interinstitutional communication and coordination against, in between units. Another thing is, we need to do, and I think you touched base at it at the beginning, Joyce, where you said the trafficking is an evolving crime. Half the time when we've done trainings, what we teach in one session, we can't teach it in the next one because it's already old. And I think we need to try to have that same practice with our reviewing, screening, and referral procedures. Like these are things that need to be evolving as the crime changes. So if you have your standard form and it does not, include elements of what cyber scamming or even sports trafficking could look like, it's time precisely to review those screening and referral procedures among organizations. Another one thing that, we continue to sort of push and work with member states and promote is ongoing capacity building, ongoing coordination. I think Candy touched base on the relevance of speaking to your point of contact, utilizing regional platforms is key to combating this as well. And then sort of having a clear understanding the reach of, technology facilitated trafficking, like there's no limits to it. So yeah, I think I'll stop here. Thank you, Joyce.
Well, thank you so much for that. I do agree. And do we still have Lerina here? Okay, Lerina, I just wanted to know also about the awareness program that you have. Can you let us know? I mean, is there any and within the Caribbean, and also are these in schools? Are schools engaged, federations engaged, and so forth with these
Thank you,
awareness
Joycelyn.
programs?
Thank you. So, the approach that we take to tackling this issue is a preventative one. And so, the past couple of years, we've had a youth focus. Obviously, it's obvious, but we have developed programs that we want to have youth as, community enforcers, and the Youth Ambassador program that is currently in activation was developed with the University of Kentucky, Monterey Institute of Technology, and it's a youth-facing program, and the ambassadors are, being asked to go into their communities and raise awareness and advocate for, policy changes. We're asking them to go to their school principals, and ask whether their school has child protection policies. We're asking the university level ambassadors, if some of them are athletes, to go to their athletic divisions and check and make sure that their athletics division has a safeguarding policy, a modern slavery statement. Within the Youth Ambassador program, we also developed the Red Card to Trafficking, which coincided with the recently, concluded World Cup. So that was another tool that we put in their hands to be able to use their online platforms to raise awareness. So if you go on our website, you'll be able to see that as well. And for this particular program, we partnered with the International Organization for Migration. And so we have Uruguay, IOM Uruguay, we have IOM Morocco. Nigeria is about to begin the program. Who else do we have? And we've also activated it as well in the three different host countries of the World Cup. And so that has been our youth-facing program for the past year or two.
Thank you so much, Lerina. And Adrian, I see you popped in. Is it because there's a question in the chat?
Yes, Joycelyn. Candice Battalion is asking, are there any official data or statistics on sports trafficking and cyber scamming cases in Trinidad and Tobago? How prevalent is this issue here right now? Quite country specific. So I'm not sure if Joycelyn.
Anyone could answer that.
Yeah, I can answer for the Trinidad aspect with the scamming. The stats are on the TTPS website as it relates to cases, but the issue is, as we always say in CARICOM IMPACS, if there's no law, there's no crime. So the crime may not fall under specifically scamming, but it will fall under existing laws that are within that specific country. right? So sometimes you might see as in scam, it might be a method of burglary or theft based on the amount. So it may not have the specific law that may cover it, but there are some stats that you can get on the ttps.gov.tt website that will give you some stats that relates to the type of fraudulent crimes that will be taking place and if it falls under scamming.
Thank you, Candy. Anyone wants to add to that? Oh,
Yes, I wanted to
okay.
just say that for, the global thematic report, it was global. Obviously, it was the first of its kind. We had consultations, part of the methodology was having consultations in different regions, and we also used a survey. We didn't find any cases in the Caribbean, but it's obviously not to say that it doesn't exist. It just means that that was not a particular region that for whatever reason we looked at. So that is a gap that we want to address in the next edition of the Global Thematic Report. What I would say though is now that there is a definition in place, and there are the typologies, and there is now an interpretive guide to allow, as I mentioned, law enforcement and so forth to be able to distinguish the various forms of exploitation and trafficking to sport trafficking. It now, there's now a tool and a resource to allow for that data to be arrived at. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope that answers your question, Candice. A question that I wanted to pose also to all, I spoke to Candy about that, and I'll also pose that to the other panelists. Private and public partnerships. How do you see that? How do you work with them? How do you see that role in preventing this crime? Preventing sports crime. Over to you. Oh, she's gone. She's gone, Teresa. Okay, Diahann, private-public partnership. How do we see those working to detect and disrupt these sort of schemes, Diahann?
Right. So, excellent question, Joycelyn. I think one of the main points of pivoting is that certainly public, if you're talking about, let's say, government entities, they are strong on framework, legislation, policies, and creating that environment that says that within our particular jurisdiction, we are an anti-trafficking environment. But I think a key part of the puzzle is to recognize when you have specialist private entities, whether they be perhaps a company or an NGO or civil society organization that has a particular skill set that's working, for example, with, let's say, victim rehabilitation or support, that we need to be having meaningful partnerships, whether through MOUs or any kind of other understanding that says if we have victims that fit a particular profile, then we know we have to engage this particular entity. There may be a private entity that is great with psychosocial support that, is more victim-centered. So that would be another useful partner. And there's so many others, those that could help with repatriation. Let us say there is an organization, private sector now, not civil society per se, that has decided that for their corporate citizenship, they want to focus on how to assist victims with repatriation expenses. So it's about and seeing how they can complement whatever is your national roadmap to supporting victims and also to enhancing prosecutions and preventative entities. I dream of a day, for example, where we have media houses saying, we are responsible corporate citizens, we will give you free airtime to use as you see fit to build the preventative network a little bit more specifically, to your jurisdiction's needs. So those are just some of the thoughts that come to mind very readily.
Thank you so much for that, Diahann. Lissette?
Thank you. I think that is a fantastic question, Joyce. We hosted in December the conference and global partnership against online scams, and it had a focus on that. And one of the biggest things that we had precisely was the participation of the private sector. And Diahann mentioned one key word there, and it was resources. Many times the private sector has a lot of resources to support these awareness efforts, needs that we have. In the past, as UNODC, through projects, we have worked with the private sector to, help ease investigations, help increase awareness. So continuing to partner with the private sector would be key. Usually these companies have an arm of social responsibility that are, you know, commonly open to talk about that. And I think that's always an opportunity to continue to explore. I've had, projects and initiatives before with the private sector where they are pretty eager to spread the word, and especially if it has a direct impact to their business, which most of the time it does in terms of trafficking.
Thank you so much. And Candy, you did respond already, so that is good. So let us do a wrap up now. I notice Adrian is here. It's very time. Just want to say, if you had to introduce from each panel, let's just wrapping up, a minute wrap up. If you had to introduce one immediate policy or operational measure tomorrow, what would that be?
Man.
Candy, you want to start?
The challenge I see in the region is the legislative aspect, from a cyber perspective. I would say if we could try to harmonize laws that would allow that if something happens, let's say in Trinidad, and the criminal may traverse through the region, that we are able to prosecute these criminals, because that is one of the issues that we are having, that the laws are not harmonized. So some sort of MOU, some understanding within the region to help better identify and combat these criminals. That's what I would look at.
Thank you, Candy. Lizette?
Thank you, Candy. And I think on my end, very much of a UNODC flag, precisely that, having the legislation be that instrument that allows for that cooperation, that exchange, and it sort of leads those processes of investigation. And then second, a little bit of what I mentioned earlier, updating, screening, referral mechanisms, and sort of harmonize that relationship among the different law enforcement units that converge in the potential presence of a case of online scam, for example. I think that would be my two ideal things. Thank you.
Thank you. And Diahann?
An imperative that once you work in a particular sector, you must undergo minimal training in how to spot the signs of human trafficking. Because I believe that stakeholders are very critical, boots on the ground, even though not necessarily formal investigators. But information that comes in good time is always excellent information. And to recognize that there are tools available and resources in the online space that gives you that ready information. And also a very shameless plug to say that in keeping with the increasing trends in cyber trafficking, a good point of reference for starting that preventative awareness building training is to become a FAY with the soon to be released on the 31st of this month, the cyber trafficking comic book that the Office of the National Rapporteur has developed for this very reason, to bring awareness to this issue in very understandable and easy to read material. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I do hope we'll get a copy of that magazine, that comic book, when it is released.
Yes.
I will reach out to Adrian about that to remind him, hey, to share our copy. So thank you so much for that. And of course, to our panelists, Lizette, Candy, Lerina had to step away, and Diahann for a thoughtful, provoking, and illuminating discussion this afternoon. It was indeed great. We've learned a lot from each other. And today's conversation has shown that trafficking continues to assume new forms. Sports, yet its foundation remained rooted in deception, vulnerability, and exploitation of human aspirations. Whether concealed behind an online employment opportunity or the promise of a sporting career, the harm is profound and the need for coordinated action and the collaboration is urgent and key. So our task, therefore, is to ensure that the legislation, and Candy spoke about that, keeps pace with the change in criminal methods, that practitioners are equipped, and Diahann spoke about that, training and capacity building. So they are equipped to recognize victims, the signs of exploitation, and that national, regional, and international institutions work together, and Lissette spoke about that, to transform awareness into protection and commitment into action. And of course, Lerina also spoke about that in her presentations earlier. So most importantly, our responses must always preserve the dignity of the victims and ensure that those compelled to commit offenses are recognized not merely by what they were forced to do, but by what was done to them. So thank you so much. Over to you. It was a pleasure hosting this, moderating this panel today, Adrian. And I do look forward to the other discussions upcoming during the upcoming week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joycelyn, and your wonderful panelists. As you said, we learned quite a bit. I wanted to point out that persons can look in the chat. Lerina mentioned the Global Thematic Report on Sport Trafficking. So there's a link to that report in the chat. And Candy mentioned the different initiatives that CARICOM IMPACS has run, especially for public awareness, such as the brown bag session. So there's a cyber brown bag session coming up on the 23rd of July, and it speaks to artificial intelligence in cybersecurity. So there's a registration link there for Zoom. So feel free to connect to that. All right. I just wanted to just reflect on where we are and the fact that this is not work for the faint of heart. Those of you in operational spaces know that far more than many of us. And those of you who are working in protection, but especially those persons who are survivors of different forms of trafficking. So before we rush back to whatever it is we were doing, I just want to encourage people to take a few minutes to engage in some self-care. This actually is a webinar series that will culminate on the 24th of July, which is International Self-Care Day. Just as we did last year, we have asked survivor leader Sandra Christie Brown, who's the founder of Finding Your Light Foundation, to take us through a brief self-care session before we close off. Sandra, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, wherever you are. I'm wearing my shades because I had an exam today and my eyes are kind of dilated. That's why I'm wearing the shades. I wasn't outside doing football, but I do have on my football jersey at this time. I want everyone to get up and stretch. You've been sitting down. I see Ms. Harrison, I see you have been sitting down. Just kind of get up and let's just stretch. Let's get a stretch in. Oh my, oh, that feels good. Let's lean to the right. This is your left, and let's lean to your left and to your right. And let's go up. And let's go forward. And let's give ourselves a big hug because who matters? We matters more than anything else, right? So I'm so happy to be here in this space today, and I have been listening to all the conversation, very interesting, and we're ahead of the game. The traffickers may think they're ahead of the game, but we are on it, and I'm happy I'm a part of a team that's very intentional to bring more awareness and also to help our community and our survivors to identify scamming, and there's so much going on the cyberspace. I myself, once I'd received an email, thought it was from PayPal, and they had a logo and everything, even had a phone call. And I don't know how they got the phone call. The companies number to dial in and say they're calling from PayPal. Immediately, I know PayPal would have called me, so I hung up the phone. So we have to be vigilant, right? Okay, so our first self-care tip for today is, as we know, self-care isn't a luxury, it's a medical necessity to help your brain cope with stress and boost your mood. So we have to be intentional each day. And I know it's hard. We have a lot on our plate. I do myself have a lot on our plates, but we have this little phone right here and it has an alarm, right? So we can set our alarm. I set my alarm on Alexa and I'll say, Alexa, every 3 hours, give me a reminder that I need to step away from my computer and take a break. If we don't have Alexa, we can use our phones to set alarm, right? The first one is to stick with a routine sleep habit of 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And I know you're saying, Sandra, who gets that, right? Very difficult to get that, but we have to realize that if we don't get appropriate rest, our brain is not going to function properly, right? And we're going to be shortening our lifespan and we're not going to be able to cope properly if we don't have enough rest. I know when I don't have enough rest, I cannot cope. So same thing with you. You have to have enough rest in order to keep going and keep the momentum. The second thing is set healthy boundaries. And this one I had to learn. It's okay to say no, right? Some of us already master that. Some of us not there yet. Some of us still working through it. It's okay to say no. Protect your emotional energy by stepping away from things that drain you. And I can say people too that have drained you. I had to step away from different, group chats that, wasn't lining up with my purpose. So was draining my purpose. So what I had to do was step away. And that was for a part of my self-care, right? So changing, switching away, getting away from unnecessary things such as your work emails at night. And that I'm big on this because we're tempted. All times we have a alert on our phone, burp, an email come in, we rush to go check it, right? So let's be intentional about turning off those alarms sometimes, especially when we are having our personal time. No alarm, no notification that we have received the email. So we have to be intentional about checking work emails at night is a no-no. It can wait till tomorrow, right? So if it's important, you'll get a phone call, I'm sure, right? Practice mindful breathing. And that's something that I do in the morning and it helps me. It's kind of just open up your lungs, kind of just get all that, whatever was on your brain, the brain fog, kind of shake that a little bit. So take 5 minutes each morning, close your eyes, slow breathing, and focus on the present. Just focus on your breathing and you'll see what a difference that makes. Well, folks, I'm off to go see Shamir to celebrate our big birthday tomorrow. So I have a flight to catch. So that's all I have for you today. So tomorrow I'll be tuning in with you from Maryland with Shamir. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great day. And thank you for everything. Ms. Harrison, special love to you. Thank you for being my rescuer. And Adrian, thank you for being that support for us here as survivors on this platform. Thank you, everyone, for all that you do. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so very much, Sandra. And happy birthday to Shamir Mackenzie, who'll celebrate her International Public Holiday birthday tomorrow, God willing. So this brings us to the end of day one. Please join us for day two of this webinar series, tomorrow, God willing, where we'll discuss meaningful youth engagement in the anti-trafficking movement. Thanks to all of our panelists, our wonderful moderator, dear Sandra, taking us through some very reflective tips there on self-care, which I think we all can admit we need to do more of, right? So God's blessings to all of you. Have a wonderful afternoon. See you tomorrow, God willing. Bye-bye.
And take care,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone. Take
Bye.
care.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.